I never expected to spend my 68th birthday sleeping in an abandoned garage surrounded by the scent of motor oil and decades of dust. Yet here I was fumbling with an unfamiliar key in the dark, tears blurring my vision as my son's words echoed in my mind. "You're just a useless old woman, Mom. What would you even do with a real inheritance? Dad knew that." But let me back up. You need to understand how I ended up here homeless on my birthday, clutching a suitcase containing what remained of my 45-year marriage. The day had started in attorney Franklin Hoffman's office on the 23rd floor of a downtown Los Angeles high-rise. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, but I felt nothing but cold. I sat in a leather chair that seemed to swallow me whole, wearing the same black dress I'd worn to Bill's funeral 3 weeks earlier. My hands trembled as I clutched my old leather purse, the one with Bill's photograph tucked inside the one I'd carried for over 4 decades. Daniel sat beside me in his perfectly tailored Italian suit, his Rolex catching the light every time he glanced at his watch. The cologne he wore cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He was 42 years old, successful beyond anything Bill and I had ever imagined, and yet somewhere along the way, he had become a stranger to me. Franklin Hoffman had been our family attorney for over 30 years. He'd drawn up our first will when Daniel was just a baby. He'd helped us buy our first house, navigate Bill's business ventures, and plan for retirement. I trusted him completely. But today, something was different. Franklin kept adjusting his glasses, shuffling papers, clearing his throat. His usual calm demeanor had been replaced by something that looked almost like dread. "Before I begin," he said, his voice unusually formal, "I want to assure you both that everything is legally binding and precisely as Mr. Thornton instructed." I should have recognized that statement as the warning it was. The reading itself passed in a blur legal language, washing over me like waves I couldn't quite grasp. But certain phrases stood out with devastating clarity. "To my son Daniel William Thornton, I leave our penthouse residence in Los Angeles and my primary investment portfolio valued at approximately—" I watched Daniel's face transform from solemn grief to barely suppressed triumph. His fingers tapped against his knee in a rhythm of satisfaction. Then came the words that would change everything. "To my beloved wife, Amanda Rose Thornton, I leave the property located at 1420 Industrial Parkway, the garage and its contents." A garage. After 45 years of marriage, after raising his son, after standing beside him through every triumph and failure, after holding his hand as he took his last breath, my husband had left me a garage. The room fell silent. I felt Daniel's hand on my shoulder, squeezing slightly too hard as he leaned down to whisper, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll make sure you're taken care of." But his voice was cold, and I felt something in those words that made my skin crawl. Not comfort, not love. Something else entirely. I was too stunned to respond, too confused to question. Where was I supposed to live? What was I supposed to do? Bill had always handled our finances. I didn't even know how much money we had in our checking account. The answers came brutally clear that evening. Daniel drove me back to what I still thought of as my home, the penthouse overlooking the city that Bill and I had shared for the last 15 years of our marriage. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, but I couldn't see the beauty. I could only feel the numbness spreading through my chest. I'd barely stepped through the door when Daniel set my suitcase down in the entryway with a thud that echoed through the empty foyer. "I think it would be best if you found somewhere else to stay, Mom." I stared at him, not comprehending. "What do you mean? The penthouse is mine now." His voice had that rehearsed quality he'd perfected in his business dealings, smooth, reasonable, utterly without warmth. "It's in the will. I'm having some colleagues over tomorrow to discuss turning Dad's study into a home office, and I need to start making changes." My legs felt weak. I reached for the back of a chair to steady myself. But where am I supposed to go? Daniel shrugged, the gesture so dismissive, so casual, that it took my breath away. "You could stay with Aunt Helen for a while. Or there's always that garage Dad left you." He laughed, and the sound cut through me like broken glass. "Though why he left you that dump is beyond me. What are you going to do with it? Open a mechanic shop at your age?" "Daniel, this is my home. Your father and I—" "It's not your home anymore." He cut me off, his voice hardening. "It's mine. Dad made that perfectly clear." I felt something shift inside me, then some foundation crumbling that I hadn't even known was there. This was my son, the baby I'd nursed through fevers and nightmares, The boy whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose homework I'd helped with, whose college tuition I'd helped save for. When had he become this person? I need time to find somewhere to go, I said, my voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Surely you don't expect me to leave tonight. That's when he said it. The words that would echo in my mind for hours afterward, that would follow me through the darkest night of my life. You're just a useless old woman, Mom. What would you even do with a real inheritance? Dad knew that. The cruelty was so unexpected, so at odds with the son I thought I'd raised, that I couldn't even respond. I simply took my suitcase, my purse, and the key Franklin Hoffman had pressed into Mem. I drove aimlessly through the city for hours, tears making the streetlights blur into streams of color. I passed the restaurant where Bill and I had celebrated our 40th anniversary, the park where we'd walked every Sunday morning for 20 years, the hospital where I'd held his hand as his heart monitor flatlined. 45 years. 45 years of loving someone, of building a life together, of believing we were partners in everything, and in the end he'd left me with nothing but a garage in an industrial district. Had I done something wrong? Had Bill stopped loving me somewhere along the way? The questions circled in my mind like vultures picking at wounds I didn't know I had. Eventually, as the sky darkened and the city lights flickered on, I found myself following the GPS to 1420 Industrial Parkway. I don't know why. Maybe I just needed to see it, this mysterious inheritance that was apparently all I was worth. The neighborhood was exactly what I'd expected: warehouses, storage facilities, and chain-link fences topped with barbed wire. The kind of place where respectable women didn't venture after dark. The kind of place where no one would notice an old woman in a dusty car crying into her steering wheel. The garage itself was unremarkable from the outside, a squat building with faded paint and a single rusted door. Weeds grew through cracks in the concrete. The windows were so dirty I couldn't see through them. This was my inheritance. This was what 45 years of marriage had earned me. I sat in the car for a long time watching the last light fade from the sky. It was my birthday. I was 68 years old today. Bill had always made such a fuss about my birthday's flowers breakfast in bed, that special chocolate cake from the bakery on Maple Street. Now I was alone in an industrial parking lot with nowhere to go and no one who cared. Finally, I stepped out of the car. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint smell of diesel and something metallic I couldn't identify. My heels clicked against the cracked pavement as I approached the door. The key felt cold in my trembling fingers. It took 3 tries to fit it into the rusted lock. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control them. Daniel's words kept playing in my head like a broken record. Useless old woman. Useless old woman. The lock clicked. The door groaned in protest as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the darkness like a warning. I fumbled for my phone, switching on the flashlight. The beam cut through decades of darkness, illuminating dust motes that swirled in the disturbed air. And then I saw it. I froze in place, my breath catching, my heart stopping for one impossible moment. Because the interior wasn't filled with junk or abandoned tools as I'd expected. The space before me contained 3 vehicles, each covered with custom-fitted cloth covers, arranged with meticulous precision. But it was the gleaming object partially visible at the front of the garage that made my knees buckle. The unmistakable silver grille of a vintage Aston Martin. Its polished surface caught the light of my flashlight, like a beacon in the darkness, like a star that had been waiting for me to find it. "Bill," I whispered into the stillness. "What on earth were you doing?" My fingers trembled as I pulled the fitted cover from the first car. The soft material slid away to reveal a 1964 Aston Martin DB5 in pristine silver birch, identical to the one Sean Connery drove in those James Bond films Bill had loved so much. The car gleamed as if it had just rolled off the factory floor, not as if it had been sitting in this obscure garage for years. I moved to the second vehicle, my heart beating faster with each step. A 1956 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing emerged from beneath its cover, its distinctive doors and elegant lines unmistakable even to my untrained eye. The deep blue paintwork was immaculate, the chrome details catching my flashlight's beam like scattered stars. The third cover concealed a Ferrari, a 1967 275 GTB G4, according to the small plaque mounted on a stand beside it. Its deep red color reminded me of the wine Bill would order on our anniversaries, rich and intense and full of memories. I wasn't an expert. I didn't know the first thing about cars, but even I understood that these weren't just nice old cars. These were treasures. And that's when I noticed the envelope taped to the wall beside a light switch. It had my name written on it in Bill's unmistakable handwriting, the same handwriting that had signed our marriage certificate, that had written me love notes for 45 years, that had filled birthday cards with words that made me cry. With fingers that wouldn't stop shaking, I pulled it down, found the light switch, and flooded the garage with unexpected brightness from modern LED fixtures recessed into the ceiling. The sudden illumination revealed something extraordinary. This was no ordinary garage. The space had been professionally finished with climate control systems, custom flooring, and specialized storage areas along the walls. What looked dilapidated from outside was intentional camouflage concealing the treasures within. I sank onto a leather bench positioned against one wall, the envelope heavy in my hands. And then I began to read. My dearest Amanda, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've discovered what I've come to think of as my final gift to you. First, I need to say I'm sorry for the shock and confusion you must be feeling right now. The secrecy wasn't meant to hurt you. It was meant to protect what I was building for your future. The letter trembled in my hands as I continued reading each word from Bill, reaching across the divide between life and death to hold me one last time. 6 years ago, when I received my diagnosis of progressive heart failure, the doctors gave me 5 years at best. I beat their timeline by a year, but I knew our time together was limited. And I needed to ensure you would be taken care of after I was gone. I know you're wondering about the will, why I would leave our home to Daniel instead of to you. Believe me, this decision caused me more sleepless nights than my health ever did. I had to stop reading. Tears were streaming down my face so fast I couldn't see the words. 6 years. Bill had known for 6 years that he was dying, and he'd never told me the full truth. He'd always downplayed it. Always said the doctors were optimistic. Always changed the subject when I pressed for details. All that time he'd been building this, planning for a future he knew he wouldn't see. I wiped my eyes and forced myself to continue. But over the past decade, I've watched our son change. The ambitious boy we raised has become something different, something harder and more calculating than I ever wanted him to be. The truth is, I feared what would happen to you if I left everything to both of you jointly, or even if I split things equally. Daniel would have found ways to control the assets to manage your portion for your benefit, as he would say. I've seen how he speaks to you when he thinks I'm not listening, Amanda. How he dismisses your opinions and needs. How he looks at you sometimes like you're an obstacle rather than his mother. A sob escaped me. Bill had noticed. All those times I'd made excuses for Daniel's behavior, told myself he was just busy or stressed with his career, Bill had seen the truth I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. So I created this split inheritance with very deliberate intentions. Daniel has received what he will see as the valuable portion, the penthouse, the visible investments, the status symbols. But what you're looking at now, my love, is the real wealth. These 3 cars alone are worth approximately $12 million. I read the number 3 times, certain I'd misunderstood. $12 million. The garage I'd thought was worthless contained $12 million in vintage automobiles. The documentation in the portfolios beside each car will confirm their provenance. You'll find contact information for Raymond Blackwell, my trusted dealer and advisor for these acquisitions. He can help you with whatever you decide to do with them. But the cars are just the beginning. My hands were shaking so badly now that I had to set the letter down for a moment. Just the beginning, I looked around the garage with new eyes at the climate control systems humming quietly, at the spotless floors, at the museum-quality lighting illuminating each vehicle like a work of art. This wasn't some hobby or secret indulgence. This was a carefully constructed fortress of financial security. I picked up the letter again. In the safe behind the photograph of us in Venice combination is our anniversary. You'll find documentation for several investment properties I've acquired over the past 6 years, all placed in a living trust that transferred to your name upon my death. You'll also find banking information for accounts that should provide you with comfortable income for the rest of your life. And there's one more thing. I bought us a house, Amanda. A cottage in Carmel, the town we always talked about retiring to. It's fully furnished, ready, and waiting for you. The address and keys are in the safe. I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. Carmel. We'd visited there on our 35th anniversary, walked along the beach at sunset, talked about growing old together in a little house by the sea. I'd thought it was just a dream, one of those someday fantasies couples share. Bill had made it real. I know this is overwhelming, and I'm sorry for keeping all of this from you. At first, it was just a project to channel my anxiety about the future. But as the portfolio grew, I realized revealing it prematurely might put it at risk, especially if Daniel discovered the extent of these holdings. You're probably wondering why I didn't simply protect you through more conventional means. The truth is, I wanted to give Daniel a chance to show his true character. Perhaps faced with his inheritance and responsibility for you, he would rise to become the man we raised him to be. If he's proven himself worthy, if he's ensured your comfort and security, then perhaps you might choose to share some of this wealth with him. But if he has revealed a different nature, well, then this legacy is your protection against that reality. Your independence, your freedom. I've always believed that character reveals itself most clearly at moments of inheritance, both what we receive and what we believe we deserve. Daniel is receiving a test as much as an inheritance. And you, my love, are receiving the means to live the remainder of your life exactly as you choose, beholden to no one. All my love, now and always, Bill. I pressed the letter to my chest and wept. Not tears of grief this time, but something more complicated, sorrow and gratitude and love all tangled together, until I couldn't tell where one ended and another began. After 45 years, I thought I'd known everything about my husband. Instead, I was only now discovering the true depth of his love and foresight. I found the photograph exactly where Bill had described a framed picture of us on the Rialto Bridge in Venice, laughing as a street musician serenaded us during our 35th anniversary trip. I remembered that day so clearly, the warm Italian sun, the smell of the canals, Bill's arm around my waist as he whispered that he wanted to spend every remaining day of his life making me this happy. The safe behind the frame opened with a soft click when I entered our anniversary date, June 15th, 1979. The day I'd said yes to a nervous young man with big dreams and gentle hands. Inside, I found a thick portfolio and several USB drives neatly labeled. The top document was titled, Estate of William Thornton Complete Asset Inventory for Amanda Thornton. I opened it with trembling fingers and immediately had to sit down again. Apartment buildings in Seattle. Commercial property in Chicago. A small vineyard in Northern California. Stock portfolios, bonds, private equity investments. Page after page of assets I'd never known existed, all carefully structured to transfer seamlessly to my name upon Bill's death. The total value at the bottom of the final page made my ears ring. $28 million. Combined with the cars, my worthless inheritance was worth over $40 million. I laughed then, a strange, slightly hysterical sound that echoed through the empty garage. Just hours ago, my son had called me a useless old woman with nothing to offer. He'd thrown me out of my home, mocked the garage his father had left me, made me feel like a burden to be discarded. And all along I'd been sitting on a fortune that dwarfed his precious penthouse many times over. The irony was almost too much to bear. I spent that first night on the leather sofa in the garage's small office, wrapped in a blanket I found in a storage closet. It wasn't until morning that I fully appreciated the extent of Bill's preparations. The office contained a compact bathroom with a shower, a mini refrigerator stocked with water and basic provisions, and even a small closet with several changes of clothes and my size tags still attached. My practical husband had anticipated I might need temporary shelter here, but I didn't want to stay in a garage no matter how luxurious its hidden contents. I wanted to see the house Bill had prepared for me, the home he'd imagined us sharing in retirement, now waiting for me to claim it alone. The drive to Carmel took me along Highway 1, winding through coastal cliffs that offered glimpses of the Pacific's vast blue expanse. The late afternoon sun cast everything in gold, and for the first time since Bill's death, I felt something other than grief. I felt hope. The cottage was exactly what Bill would have chosen for us, a modest stone house partially hidden behind mature cypress trees with a natural wood gate leading to a flagstone path that wound through a small but beautifully maintained garden. Not ostentatious, not showy, just warm and welcoming and perfectly absolutely us. The key from the safe fit smoothly into the lock. I pushed open the door and stopped breathing. Every detail seemed chosen specifically with me in mind. The living room featured built-in bookshelves surrounding a stone fireplace with comfortable seating in colors I'd always loved, soft blues and warm creams and touches of sage green. Natural light poured through multi-paned windows, illuminating hardwood floors covered with hand-woven rugs. The kitchen was updated but traditional, with a breakfast nook overlooking the garden. The bedroom was cozy, opening onto a private patio with a glimpse of the ocean between neighboring properties. But it was the small study off the living room that finally broke me completely. There, above a simple writing desk, hung a painting I recognized instantly, a watercolor of the Venice Canal where Bill had proposed, created by a street artist all those decades ago. We'd lost the original in a movie years before, and I'd mourned it ever since. Bill had found another one. Or perhaps he'd commissioned a replica from my description, from my memories, from the love I'd poured into telling that story over and over again throughout our marriage. I sank into the window seat cushioned in my favorite shade of blue and let the tears come. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming, impossible gratitude. Even in death, Bill was taking care of me, still loving me, still paying attention to the small details that made me feel seen and cherished. A soft knock at the door roused me from my contemplation as evening fell. I opened it to find an elegant woman in her 70s standing on my doorstep, a covered dish in her hands and kindness in her eyes. "Hello," she said warmly. "You must be Amanda. I'm Eleanor Prescott, your neighbor 2 doors down. Bill asked me to keep an eye out for when you arrived." I blinked in surprise. "You knew Bill?" She nodded, offering the dish. "He visited several times over the past few years preparing the cottage. I'm one of the few people who knew about his project. He made me promise not to reach out until you came to claim the place." Her eyes crinkled kindly. "It's just a simple casserole. I thought you might not want to worry about cooking your first night here." Over tea in the kitchen that Bill had designed for me, Eleanor filled in more gaps in my understanding. "Bill was so meticulous about getting everything right," she explained. "He'd bring photographs of your home in the city, trying to capture your aesthetic while creating something that belonged here in Carmel. He talked about you constantly, your favorite colors, the books you loved, the way you took your coffee in the morning." I had no idea he was doing any of this. I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "He kept it completely secret." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "He mentioned that. Said it was for your protection, though he didn't elaborate." She studied me with gentle directness. "He did say that when you finally came, you might need a friend, someone who understood what it was to rebuild a life after loss. You've lost someone too." "My husband 8 years ago." She smiled softly. "It gets different, if not easier. Having good neighbors helps." By the time Eleanor left, promising to introduce me to others in the community when I felt ready, I understood something profound about my husband's planning. He hadn't just provided me with financial security and a physical home. He'd thought about my emotional needs, my social needs, my need for connection and community. Bill had given me not just money, but a complete new life waiting to be lived. 2 weeks passed in a rhythm that felt increasingly natural. Mornings I walked the beach, letting the Pacific waves wash away the last of my grief. Afternoons I explored the cottage, finding new evidence of Bill's love in every carefully chosen detail. Evenings I spent with Eleanor, learning about my new community slowly emerging from the cocoon of shock and sorrow. I'd almost forgotten about Daniel. But Daniel hadn't forgotten about me. It started with phone calls I didn't answer, then texts I ignored. Then came the voicemails, increasingly frustrated. "Mom, where are you? Aunt Helen says you haven't been in touch. This is ridiculous. You can't just disappear. I've been going through Dad's papers. There are some things that don't add up. Call me back." I knew it was only a matter of time before he found me. Bill might have been clever, but Daniel was relentless when he wanted something. It was the quality that had made him successful in business, and the quality that had slowly eroded his humanity. The call from Raymond Blackwell came on a Tuesday morning. "Mrs. Thornton, I wanted to give you a heads up." His cultured voice carried a note of concern. "Someone's been making inquiries about vintage car collections in the Los Angeles area, asking about your husband, specifically about any vehicles he might have acquired. The questions are coming from someone named Daniel Thornton." My stomach dropped. "My son." I assumed as much. I haven't revealed anything, of course, but he's persistent, and he's hired a private investigator. 3 days later, I was tending roses in my front garden when a luxury SUV I didn't recognize pulled up to the cottage. The personalized license plate read D. Thornton. Daniel stepped out, and even from a distance I could see the fury in his eyes. "Found you," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Nice place you've got here, Mom. When were you planning to mention it?" I set down my gardening gloves and met his gaze steadily. "Hello, Daniel. Why don't you come inside?" What happened next would change everything, but that's a story for another time. Daniel followed me into the cottage, his expensive Italian loafers clicking against the hardwood floors that Bill had chosen with such care. I watched him take in every detail, the built-in bookshelves, the stone fireplace, the ocean glimpse through the back windows, and I could almost see him calculating the property value in his head. "Charming," he said, the words somehow made insulting by his tone. "So this is why you've been dodging my calls. You've been hiding out in a secret vacation home while I've been worried sick." I didn't bother pointing out that worried sick was a generous description for his angry voicemails. Instead, I moved to the kitchen and filled the kettle for tea. If we were going to have this conversation, we might as well be civilized about it. "I haven't been hiding, Daniel. I've been processing enormous changes and deciding how to move forward." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, jaw tight. "And when exactly were you planning to tell me about this place, or about the garage?" My hands stilled on the kettle. "What about the garage?" "Don't play games with me, Mom." His voice rose, the professional veneer cracking to reveal something uglier underneath. "I had someone check on that property. Dirty windows, but not dirty enough. I saw what's inside. Vintage cars, the kind worth serious money." So there it was. Daniel had discovered part of the truth, but not its full extent. He'd seen the cars, but likely had no idea about the investment properties, the trust, the complete financial empire Bill had secretly built. "Your father made his choices," I said, carefully pouring hot water into the teapot. "The penthouse and investment portfolio he left you are substantial gifts." Daniel laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that reminded me uncomfortably of the man he'd become. "Substantial? The penthouse needs hundreds of thousands in repairs I only discovered after starting renovations. The investment portfolio barely covers my existing commitments. Meanwhile, you're living in a Carmel cottage and apparently own a collection of classic cars worth, what, $10,015,000. I carried the tea tray to the breakfast nook and sat down, gesturing for him to join me. After a moment of stubborn standing, he relented, dropping into the chair across from me with barely concealed frustration. "Your father left you exactly what he intended to leave you," I said, "and me exactly what he intended for me. The why of it is explained in a letter he wrote." Daniel's eyes sharpened. "A letter? You have a letter explaining all of this, and you didn't think to share it?" "It was addressed to me, Daniel. It was personal, and given how you treated me after the will reading—" I let the sentence hang in the air between us, heavy with unspoken accusation. He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "I was upset. People say things they don't mean when they're emotional." "Do they?" I met his gaze directly. "Or do moments of high emotion simply reveal what's normally kept hidden?" The words landed like stones in still water. Daniel's expression flickered, anger, guilt, defensiveness, before settling into something harder. "I want to see this letter." I'd known this moment would come. I'd prepared for it, keeping a copy in my desk drawer for exactly this purpose. Part of me had hoped Daniel would come to me with humility, with recognition of how he'd hurt me. Part of me had known better. I retrieved the letter and handed it to him without comment. I watched Daniel read, observed his expression shifting from anticipation to disbelief to something that looked almost like pain. His hands tightened on the paper knuckles, whitening as he reached the paragraphs where Bill expressed his concerns about his son's character. When he finished, he set the letter down with deliberate care, as if afraid his control might shatter if he moved too quickly. "So," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "Dad thought I was, what, too materialistic, too selfish to be trusted with the family wealth." "He was concerned about how your values had changed over time," I replied gently, "and about how you might handle having authority over my financial well-being. And his solution was to deceive me, to create this elaborate scheme making me think I got the valuable inheritance while secretly leaving everything of real worth to you." His voice rose with each word, indignation building like a wave. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" "Daniel?" "No." He cut me off, standing so abruptly his chair scraped against the floor. "You don't get to Daniel me in that patronizing tone. Not after this. Dad manipulated me, tested me like some kind of lab rat to see if I'd pass his twisted moral examination." I remained seated, refusing to match his emotional escalation. "Your father made the best decisions he could, based on what he observed over years, not days or weeks. If his assessment seems harsh, perhaps that deserves reflection rather than rejection." He paced the small kitchen, tension radiating from every movement. "Reflection. You want me to reflect on being portrayed as some kind of heartless monster in my own father's eyes. That's not what the letter says. It expresses concern about certain tendencies, not a fixed judgment of your entire character." Daniel stopped pacing to stare at me with something that looked almost like desperation beneath the anger. Are you seriously defending this? He left you a fortune while setting me up to reveal my true nature? And apparently I failed his little test spectacularly by expecting to actually receive what the will specified. There was no point in arguing about his characterization. In a sense, he wasn't entirely wrong. Bill had created a situation designed to reveal character through action. And Daniel's actions after the will reading, throwing me out, mocking my inheritance, calling me useless, had confirmed rather than disproved his father's concerns. The question now, I said carefully, is where we go from here. Daniel laughed without humor. Where we go, that's simple. As Bill Thornton's son and legal heir, I have every right to contest this arrangement. Hidden assets, secret trusts, deliberate concealment, it all smacks of an intentional attempt to circumvent normal inheritance laws. I had anticipated this reaction. I'd spent hours with Patricia Hamilton, the estate attorney Raymond had recommended preparing for exactly this moment. The legal structures your father created are impeccable, Daniel. The assets were his to distribute as he saw fit, and he did so through proper channels documented legitimate and unassailable. Contesting would be expensive, lengthy, and almost certainly futile. You sound awfully confident for someone who claimed to know nothing about finances. I've had several weeks to consult with excellent advisors, I replied evenly. The same ones who helped your father create these arrangements. Daniel braced his hands against the counter, his back to me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the distant crash of waves and the gentle tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a clock that reminded me of the one in my childhood home. Another detail Bill had somehow known to include. When Daniel finally turned, his expression had shifted from anger to calculation, a look I recognized from the business negotiations I'd witnessed over the years. What if we reached a compromise? He suggested, his tone deliberately reasonable. A more equitable distribution that honors Dad's wishes while acknowledging my position as his son. Surely half of these assets. No. The word surprised us both with its firmness. I'm not negotiating your father's final wishes, I continued. The assets he left me aren't just about money, Daniel. They represent his care, his foresight, his desire to ensure I would never be dependent on anyone's goodwill, including yours. So that's it. His voice hardened again. You keep everything justified by Dad's paranoid suspicions about me. I stood then, meeting him at eye level. What I choose to do with these assets going forward will depend on many factors, but your sense of entitlement to them isn't helping your case. My case, he scoffed. So I'm on trial now too. Just like Dad apparently put me on trial without my knowledge. In a way, yes. I decided complete honesty was necessary. Your father's letter gave me discretion about sharing these assets with you if you demonstrated certain qualities. Your behavior since his death, particularly toward me, will influence those decisions. The blunt assessment landed like a physical blow. Daniel stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Perhaps he was. The compliant, accommodating mother he'd taken for granted had been replaced by someone with clear boundaries and expectations. You can't be serious, he finally managed. You're actually going to hold Dad's fortune hostage based on whether I pass some subjective character assessment. I'm going to honor the spirit of your father's wishes, I corrected, which included protecting these assets from being squandered or misused. He grabbed his car keys from the counter. This isn't over, not by a long shot. Daniel, I called as he headed for the door. Before you rush off to consult attorneys, consider something. What if your father was right? What if this inheritance, the visible, prestigious part, was exactly what you needed to recognize certain truths about yourself? He paused at the threshold, but didn't turn around. Save the philosophical lessons, Mom. I've had enough Campbell family wisdom for one day. The door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. I sank back into my chair, emotional exhaustion washing over me. The confrontation had gone almost exactly as I'd feared, Daniel focusing entirely on what he perceived as rightfully his, showing no real concern for my welfare, no acknowledgement of how he'd treated me. Yet beneath his indignation, I'd glimpsed something else. The hurt of a son who felt his father had judged him and found him wanting. That pain was real, even if his response to it was deeply problematic. Through the window, I watched his SUV disappear down the coastal road, and I wondered if I would ever see my son again. 3 months passed. Autumn arrived in Carmel with subtle shifts, slightly cooler mornings changing light that painted the coastline in softer hues, fewer tourists crowding the village streets. I settled into a rhythm that felt increasingly natural, dividing my time between the cottage the community Eleanor had introduced me to and the careful management of the inheritance Bill had left me. The legal challenges Daniel had threatened never materialized. Patricia Hamilton reported that after consulting with several attorneys, he'd apparently been advised that contesting the will would be both expensive and almost certainly unsuccessful. Bill's planning had been too thorough, his structures too legally sound. But the silence from my son was deafening. No calls, no emails, no acknowledgement of my existence whatsoever. I'd heard through Aunt Helen that he was proceeding with the penthouse renovations, though she'd mentioned something troubling the project was going over budget, and Daniel seemed stressed about it. I tried not to worry. He was a grown man, successful in his own right. He didn't need his mother's concern. But I worried anyway. That's what mothers do. The call from Raymond Blackwell came on a crisp October morning while I was having coffee in the garden. "Mrs. Thornton, I thought you should know your son has been making more inquiries. Not about the cars this time. He's been contacting firms associated with your husband's investments, trying to get information about the full extent of the estate. And everyone has maintained confidentiality, of course, but he's persistent, and—" Raymond hesitated. "There are rumors in certain circles that his own finances have become strained. The penthouse renovation has apparently uncovered significant structural issues, and there's been some trouble with a development project he was involved in." I thanked Raymond and ended the call staring out at the Pacific with a heavy heart. Bill's letter had predicted this, that Daniel's aggressive approach to finances might eventually lead to crisis, but knowing it intellectually was different from watching it unfold in real time. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected visitor. I was arranging fresh flowers in the living room when a modest sedan pulled up to the cottage, not Daniel's flashy SUV, but something more practical. A young woman emerged professionally dressed but with anxiety evident in every movement. "Mrs. Thornton," she approached hesitantly. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, Daniel's assistant. He doesn't know I'm here." I invited her inside, offered her tea, and waited while she gathered her courage to speak. "I probably shouldn't be doing this," Sarah began, her hands wrapped around the warm mug as if drawing strength from it. "But I've worked for Daniel for 4 years, and I've never seen him like this. He's falling apart, Mrs. Thornton, and he's too proud to ask for help. Tell me." The story emerged in fragments pieced together from Sarah's observations and overheard conversations. The penthouse renovation had indeed uncovered catastrophic structural problems: aging pipes, faulty wiring, foundation cracks that required hundreds of thousands of dollars to repair. Daniel had borrowed against his investment portfolio to cover the costs, confident he could recoup the money through a development project he'd been cultivating for years. But the development project had collapsed. Environmental assessments had discovered soil contamination on the site, requiring remediation that made the entire venture financially impossible. Investors had pulled out. Daniel was facing potential bankruptcy. "The penthouse is underwater now," Sarah said quietly. "The renovation loans used it as collateral, and with the investment losses, he can't make the payments. They're starting foreclosure proceedings." I absorbed this information in silence, my mind racing through implications and possibilities. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. Sarah met my eyes directly. "Because underneath all the bravado, Daniel talks about you sometimes, about how he wishes things were different. He's too stubborn to reach out, but I think he needs his mother, even if he can't admit it." After Sarah left, I sat in my garden for a long time watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Bill's words from the letter echoed in my mind. I wanted to give Daniel a chance to show his true character. Daniel had shown his character, and it had been found wanting. But was that the end of the story? Or was there still time for a different ending? I thought about the boy Daniel had been before success and ambition had hardened him. The child who'd brought me dandelions from the backyard, convinced they were the most beautiful flowers in the world. The teenager who'd stayed up all night to finish a science project, so determined to make his father proud. The young man who'd cried at his grandmother's funeral and wasn't ashamed of his tears. That boy was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of pride and materialism and misplaced values, perhaps, but still there. The question was whether crisis would break him or finally crack open the shell he'd built around his heart. 3 weeks after Sarah's visit, Daniel came to Carmel. I was reading by the fireplace on a rainy afternoon when I heard a car pull up. Through the window, I watched my son emerge from a rental sedan, not his usual luxury vehicle, and stand in the drizzle for a long moment staring at the cottage as if gathering courage to approach. He looked different. The tailored suits had been replaced by simple clothes that hung slightly loose on a frame that had lost weight. He hadn't shaved in days, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. But it was something in his posture that struck me most. The arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like defeat. I opened the door before he could knock. "You look like you could use some soup," I said simply. "Come inside before you catch cold." He followed me in without argument, which told me more about his state of mind than words ever could. The Daniel of 3 months ago would have bristled at being told what to do. This Daniel was too exhausted to fight. I settled him by the fireplace with a blanket and went to heat soup I'd made that morning. When I returned, he was staring into the flames with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was a small boy frightened by thunderstorms. "Mom," he said as I handed him the bowl, "I'm in trouble." "I know." He looked up sharply. "You know, Sarah came to see me a few weeks ago. She was worried about you." I sat in the chair across from him, giving him space while remaining close enough to provide comfort. "She told me about the penthouse, the development project, the foreclosure proceedings." Daniel set down the soup untouched, dropping his head into his hands. "Of course she did. Even my own assistant thinks I'm too pathetic to handle my own problems. She thinks you need help and are too proud to ask for it. There's a difference." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled, rain pattered against the windows, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the eternal rhythm of waves against the shore. Finally, Daniel looked up at me with eyes that held something I hadn't seen in years: vulnerability. "I don't know what to do, Mom. I've lost everything. The penthouse, the investments, my reputation in the industry, all of it. I'm 42 years old, and I'm going to have to declare bankruptcy." His voice cracked on the last word. "Dad was right about me, wasn't he? I was so focused on appearances, on success, on proving I was somebody important, I never saw the foundation crumbling underneath." I moved to sit beside him on the sofa, placing my hand over his. "Your father wasn't trying to punish you, Daniel. He was trying to protect both of us, you included, whether you see it that way or not. How is leaving me a money pit supposed to protect me? He tried to warn you about the penthouse. Don't you remember that Christmas, the last one before his diagnosis became critical? He kept trying to show you some building assessment report." Daniel's face went pale. "The boring old building stuff I told him to put away because we were supposed to be celebrating. The same. He'd commissioned a full structural evaluation. He knew what was waiting in those walls. He tried to prepare you, but you wouldn't listen." The realization hit Daniel like a physical blow. He slumped back against the sofa, covering his face with his hands. "God, he was trying to help me, and I dismissed him like he was some doddering old man who didn't understand modern real estate." "You were very confident in your own judgment back then." "I was arrogant." The word came out harsh, directed entirely at himself. "I was so sure I knew better than everyone, better than Dad, better than his advisors, better than anyone who tried to tell me something I didn't want to hear." He lowered his hands to look at me directly. "Including you. Especially you." "Daniel, no, let me say this." His voice steadied with determination. "I called you a useless old woman, Mom. I threw you out of your home on your birthday. I took everything you'd built with Dad and treated you like you had no claim to any of it." Tears were streaming down his face now, but he didn't try to hide them. "And you know what the worst part is? I meant it. In that moment, I actually believed you were worthless. That's who I'd become. Someone who could look at his own mother, the woman who raised him, who sacrificed for him, who loved him unconditionally, and see nothing but an obstacle to be removed." I felt my own tears falling but didn't wipe them away. This was the conversation I'd been waiting for without knowing it. The crack in Daniel's shell that might finally let the real person inside emerge. "Your father saw it happening," I said quietly. "The gradual hardening, the way success changed you. He grieved for the son he remembered even as he planned to protect me from the son you were becoming. He should have told me, confronted me directly. Would you have listened?" The question hung in the air between us. We both knew the answer. "No," Daniel admitted finally. "I would have dismissed it, told him he was overreacting, that he didn't understand the pressures I was under. I would have done exactly what I did when he tried to warn me about the penthouse." He turned to face me fully, his expression raw with emotion. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry for everything. Not just because I'm broke and desperate, though I am both of those things, but because I finally see what I did, what I became. And I hate it. I hate who I was in that lawyer's office. I hate the person who could hurt you like that and not even feel guilty about it. I reached out and cupped his face in my hands the way I used to when he was small and had done something wrong and needed to know he was still loved. Apologies are a start, I said, but they're only words. The real question is, what are you going to do differently? I don't know, he admitted. I don't even know who I am without the success, the money, the status. I built my entire identity around being someone important. Now that it's all gone, he shook his head helplessly. I don't know what's left. Maybe that's exactly where you need to be, I suggested gently. Maybe you had to lose everything external before you could find what's internal. We talked through the night as rain continued to fall and the fire burned low. Daniel told me everything, not just the financial details, but the emptiness he'd felt even at the height of his success. The relationships he'd sacrificed for business opportunities. The friendships he'd neglected. The gnawing sense that no matter how much he achieved, it was never enough. I thought if I just made more money, closed, more deals, built a bigger portfolio, eventually I'd feel satisfied, he said as dawn began to lighten the sky outside. But it never worked. There was always someone with more, someone doing better. I was chasing something I could never catch. And now, he laughed, a genuine sound if weary. Now I've got nothing, and weirdly I feel more real than I have in years. Like I've been wearing a costume my whole adult life and it finally fell off. I made us breakfast as the sun rose over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. We ate in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who have finally spoken their truths. I want to help you, I said as we finished. But not by simply writing a check to cover your debts. Daniel nodded slowly. I figured that's what you'd say. And honestly, I think you're right. If you just bailed me out, I'd probably end up right back here in 10 years. Same patterns, same mistakes, same hollow success, followed by spectacular failure. So what do you want? He considered the question carefully. I want to be different. I want to be someone Dad would have been proud of, someone you can be proud of. But I don't know how to get there from here. This was the moment I'd been preparing for, though I hadn't known it until now. The conditions I'd outlined in my mind during sleepless nights, wondering if this day would ever come. I have some ideas, I said. But they're going to require commitment from you. Real commitment, not just words. I'm listening. First, complete financial transparency. I need to see everything, every account, every debt, every commitment. No hidden liabilities, no convenient omissions. If we're going to rebuild, we start with total honesty. Daniel nodded. Done. Second, professional financial management going forward. Any funds I provide will be structured through trusts with independent trustees. Not me, not you, but professionals whose only job is to ensure the money is used wisely. You'll have access to what you need, but there will be oversight. He winced slightly at this, but didn't argue. Okay. Third, you work with a therapist. Not just a financial advisor, a mental health professional who can help you understand the patterns that led to this. The need for external validation, the fear of being seen as unsuccessful, the way you've used money and status as substitutes for genuine self-worth. This one was harder for him. I could see the resistance in his eyes, the old Daniel bristling at the suggestion that he needed psychological help. I know it feels uncomfortable, I continued, but this is non-negotiable. The financial problems are symptoms. If we don't address the underlying causes, we're just putting a bandage on a wound that will keep reopening. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. You're right. I know you're right. It's just hard to admit that I'm that broken. Not broken, I corrected gently. Human. We're all human, Daniel. We all have patterns that don't serve us. The difference is whether we're brave enough to face them. What else? Fourth, and this is the most important, you rebuild your relationship with me. Not out of obligation or guilt, but because you genuinely want to. You visit. You call. You let me be part of your life again. The real parts, not just the polished surface you show the world. Tears welled in his eyes again. I want that, Mom. More than anything. And finally, I said you find work that matters. Not just work that makes money, but work that contributes something meaningful. I don't care if it pays well or looks impressive on a resume. I care that it feeds your soul instead of starving it." Daniel let out a long breath. That might be the hardest one. I don't even know what meaningful work looks like. My whole career has been about maximizing returns, not creating value. Then we'll figure it out together, one step at a time. He reached across the table and took my hand. Thank you, Mom. I don't deserve any of this, but I'm going to try to become someone who does. That's all I ask. The months that followed were not easy. Change never is, especially when it requires dismantling everything you thought you knew about yourself. Daniel moved into a modest apartment in Monterey, close enough to visit regularly, but not so close that he could avoid building his own independent life. The bankruptcy proceedings were painful, stripping away the last vestiges of his former status. He had to tell colleagues and friends that he'd lost everything, had to endure the subtle shifts in how people treated him when he was no longer successful. But something unexpected happened in that stripping away Daniel began to find himself. The therapy sessions were difficult at first. He resisted intellectualized, tried to maintain control of the narrative even in the therapist's office. But Dr. Rebecca Morrison, a woman in her 60s who took no nonsense and radiated calm authority, gradually broke through his defenses. "You built walls to protect yourself from feeling inadequate," she told him during one session he later shared with me. "But those same walls kept out everything good too. Love, connection, joy they can't get through when you're armored against vulnerability." "I was afraid," Daniel admitted. "Afraid that if people saw the real me, they wouldn't think I was enough. And now I'm learning that being enough isn't something you achieve. It's something you accept." The work piece fell into place unexpectedly. The nonprofit organization that had purchased Daniel's failed development site reached out to him. They'd heard about his situation and remembered his reputation in the industry. They needed someone who understood commercial real estate to help them navigate a complex acquisition. "It doesn't pay much," Daniel told me when he shared the news. "Less than I used to make in a month, but they're building affordable housing, Mom. Actual homes for families who couldn't afford them otherwise. They took that contaminated land I thought was worthless, and they're turning it into something that matters. How does that feel?" He smiled a genuine smile that reminded me of the boy he'd been before ambition hardened him. "It feels like maybe Dad knew what he was doing after all." Spring returned to Carmel painting the cottage garden with colors that seemed almost impossibly vibrant. 9 months had passed since Bill's death, 6 since I'd discovered the garage's contents, and 4 since Daniel had appeared at my door, broken and ready to change. Those 4 months had brought progress I wouldn't have believed possible. Daniel's therapy was ongoing, his work with the housing nonprofit was fulfilling, and our relationship had transformed into something deeper and more honest than it had ever been before. He visited every other weekend now, and our conversations had evolved beyond the surface pleasantries that had characterized our interactions for years. We talked about real things, his fears, my hopes, memories of Bill, dreams for the future. He'd even started calling Eleanor Aunt Eleanor, which delighted her to no end. It was during one of these visits on a warm April afternoon that Daniel arrived carrying a small package and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. "I brought you something," he said, settling into his usual chair on the patio. "I found it when I was clearing out the last of my stuff from storage. Things from the penthouse that the bankruptcy trustees didn't want." He handed me a weathered leather portfolio I recognized immediately, Bill's old messenger bag, the one he'd carried to work for 30 years before retiring. "I thought I'd already been through all of Dad's things," I said, running my fingers over the cracked leather. "Where was this back corner of my storage unit? I must have grabbed it during that first frantic clearing of the penthouse. Never even opened it." With trembling hands, I unzipped the bag. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name on it, Bill's handwriting again, still reaching across the divide, and a small velvet pouch that clinked softly when I lifted it. "What is it?" Daniel asked. I opened the envelope first. Inside was a card, the kind Bill used to give me for special occasions, with a handwritten message. "For our 45th anniversary coming soon, the first band was a promise of the life we would build. This one celebrates the life we created. All my love now and always, Bill." My throat tightened. Our 45th anniversary was next month, the first one I would spend without him. With shaking fingers, I opened the velvet pouch and poured its contents into my palm. A ring, a delicate eternity band of sapphires and diamonds, simple and elegant, exactly my taste. The stones caught the spring sunlight, sending prisms dancing across my skin. He was planning ahead, Daniel said softly, watching me. Even then, always thinking about future moments. I slipped the band onto my finger next to my original wedding ring. They complemented each other perfectly, the plain gold of beginnings and the gemstones of a journey completed. "There's more," Daniel said. He pulled a small jeweler's box from his pocket. "The receipt was in the bag. The jeweler still had the order on file. I picked it up for you. I hope that's okay." Inside the box was a matching pendant, a single sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds on a delicate chain. "I don't understand," I whispered. "How did you—" "I wanted to do something, Mom. Something to show you I've changed, that I understand now what really matters." Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. "Dad left you more than money. He left you proof of how much he loved you. I wanted to be part of honoring that." I reached out and pulled my son into an embrace, something I hadn't done in years, something he wouldn't have allowed before. But now he held me back just as tightly, and I felt the last of the walls between us finally crumble. "Your father would be so proud of you," I said into his shoulder. "The man you're becoming." "I hope so," he replied. "I'm trying, Mom. Every day I'm trying." 6 months later, on the crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after Daniel's first desperate visit to Carmel, I made a decision. We were sitting on the patio after breakfast, watching the Pacific sparkle under a cloudless sky. Daniel looked healthy now he'd regained the weight he'd lost during his crisis, though he'd kept the beard that made him look so much like his father. His work with the housing nonprofit had expanded into a full-time position, and he'd recently been asked to consult on a statewide affordable housing initiative. "I've been thinking about the cars," I said, breaking a comfortable silence. Daniel looked up from his coffee. "The ones in the garage. I've decided what to do with them. Raymond has been patient, but he needs an answer." "What did you decide?" "I'm keeping the Aston Martin." I smiled at the memory of my first drive along the coastal highway, feeling closer to Bill than I had since his death. "Your father would have loved knowing I occasionally take it out for a spin." "And the others?" "I'm selling them, but I'm not keeping the money." Daniel raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. "Half will go to a foundation supporting financial education, helping people, especially women, learn how to manage money and build security for themselves. Your father believed knowledge was the best protection against vulnerability. I want to honor that." I paused, gathering myself for the next part. "The other half will go into a trust for your future children, should you have any. And there's something else. I've decided to modify the main trust to include you as a beneficiary, not with full access, but with graduated distributions based on continued financial responsibility." Daniel set down his coffee cup, his expression unreadable. "Mom, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to. Your father's letter gave me discretion to share if you demonstrated certain qualities. You have Daniel. You've done the work, made the changes, become the person he hoped you could be. He would want this. But the conditions still apply. The oversight continues. The therapy continues. The meaningful work continues. But you're not on probation anymore. You're my son, and I trust you." For a long moment, Daniel didn't speak. Then he stood, walked to the edge of the patio, and looked out at the ocean with his back to me. "You know what I've been thinking about lately," he said finally. "That development site, the one that bankrupted me. The housing project. It's almost finished. 64 units of affordable housing where I was going to build luxury condos." He turned to face me, and I saw tears on his cheeks. "Last week I got to hand keys to the first family moving in. A single mom with 2 kids who's been living in her car for 6 months. She cried, Mom, and I cried with her." He walked back to his chair and sat down, his voice thick with emotion. "I spent my whole career trying to accumulate wealth, and all it got me was emptiness and bankruptcy. Now I'm helping people find homes making a fraction of what I used to make, and I've never felt richer." He shook his head in wonder. "Dad knew. He knew what I needed wasn't more money, it was less. Less stuff, less status, less armor. More meaning, more connection, more humanity." "He wanted you to be happy," I said. "Real happiness, not the kind that depends on external circumstances." "I'm getting there." Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. "Thanks to you. Thanks to the second chance you gave me when I didn't deserve one. That's what mothers do." "No." He shook his head firmly. "Not all mothers. You could have written me off. After how I treated you, after the things I said, most people would have walked away. You didn't. You set boundaries and demanded accountability, but you never stopped loving me, never stopped believing I could change. I squeezed his hand. I saw the boy you used to be inside the man you'd become. I just had to wait for him to find his way back. We sat in comfortable silence as the morning warmed around us. The Pacific stretched to the horizon, endless and eternal, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out along its shores. But for once that vastness didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. "So," Daniel said eventually, a hint of his old humor returning, "what do you want to do today? I could take you for a drive in the Aston Martin, if you'll let me behind the wheel." I laughed, a real laugh full of joy and gratitude, and something that felt remarkably like hope. "Your father never let anyone else drive that car." "Then it would be an honor to be the first." I considered for a moment, then stood and extended my hand. "Come on then. But I'm warning you, if you scratch it, you're explaining to Raymond, not me." Daniel grinned as he took my hand. "Deal." Sometimes late at night I still visit the garage. Not often. The cottage in Carmel is home now, and I have no need for the emergency shelter Bill prepared so carefully. But occasionally, when I find myself in Los Angeles for one reason or another, I make the drive to Industrial Parkway. The building still looks dilapidated from outside. Intentional camouflage, Raymond calls it. Protection for the treasure within. But the treasure isn't really the car anymore, just the Aston Martin now gleaming silver under climate-controlled lights. The Mercedes and Ferrari are gone, sold to collectors who will cherish them, their value transformed into something more lasting than metal and leather. The real treasure is what the garage represents. Bill could have simply left me money, could have written a check, set up a straightforward trust, made everything obvious and transparent. Instead, he created this elaborate secret, the humble exterior hiding extraordinary worth. The worthless inheritance that turned out to be priceless. It was a lesson I've come to realize. A parable in architecture and automobiles. Don't judge by appearances. Don't assume you know someone's value based on what's visible. The most precious things are often hidden, waiting to be discovered by those patient and humble enough to look beyond the surface. Daniel learned that lesson the hard way, through crisis and collapse, and the painful stripping away of everything he'd used to define himself. But he learned it. And in learning it, he found something more valuable than any inheritance himself. I think Bill knew this would happen. Not the specific details, but the general shape of the story. He knew Daniel would probably fail his test. Knew I would probably find my way to independence and strength. Knew our relationship would have to break before it could heal. He couldn't fix everything from beyond the grave, but he could set up the conditions for healing to happen. Could create a structure that would support growth if growth was possible, and protect me if it wasn't. In the end, that's what love looks like. Not control, not rescue, just the patient creation of possibility and the faith that the people we love will find their way. I drive the Aston Martin home along Highway 1, the coastal road that connects my past to my present. The Pacific stretches endlessly to my left, and the sun is setting in shades of gold and rose. On my finger, Bill's rings catch the fading light, the plain gold band of our beginning, and the sapphire eternity band he never got to give me himself. Together, they tell the story of a love that transcended even death. Tomorrow, Daniel is coming for Sunday dinner. He's bringing someone, a woman he met through his work at the nonprofit, a social worker who shares his newfound passion for helping others. He's nervous about introducing her, which I find both touching and hilarious. As if I would be anything but thrilled to see him happy. Life goes on. It always does. But it goes on differently now, richer, deeper, more connected. Not despite the losses, but somehow because of them. The garage of secrets held more than cars. It held a second chance, a new beginning, a path back to what really matters. And in the end, that's worth more than any amount of money could ever buy.